welcome to this video that I'm going to do for today. It's based on the stats I have accumulated from patch 12.1 in the 4 major regions. Clearly here you see top. In the first part of this video I'll be covering the top lane. There will be 5 parts where I cover the most common matchups and the win rates in Pro versus Platinum Plus around the world in Ranked, and Challenger Plus. As you can see here, top lane, there weren't enough matches at a Challenger level for me to really break down like the win rate from. I use LOL Analytics for my win rates. So last year I did this in a written form and posted it on Reddit, and some people liked it, and eventually the Reddit mods took it down because they must not like something that gets like 400 upvotes. So in this, I just kind of, it's just interesting to me. I understand that there's plenty of different variables that go into why a matchup goes the way it does in each individual game, let alone in the matchup itself. So I'm just looking at this within a vacuum perspective, not taking into account how things, come to be. And I only did the extended breakdown if there was at least 10 matches in the 4 major regions. As you can see here, that only happened twice. I did take note of the other most common matchups, just didn't give you stats. I will give you a little bit of insight though, because there's one in particular that sticks out to me that I think is worth mentioning. Nevertheless, let's get started. So the most common matchup in top lane for 12.1 was actually the Gragas-Gwen matchup. This is to be expected though, because Gragas was picked by a lot of people to be an answer to Gwen, to be like, okay, we're going to solidify top lane, lose gracefully, and let's focus everywhere else on the Rift and see what happens. In 16 games, Gragas came out on top 69% of the time. In a Plat Plus related ranked setting, that matchup has pretty much went as a draw in a couple thousand matchups. So needless to say, in pro play, obviously teams can take better advantage of the Gragas than in a solo queue setting where you really can't use the ultimate as well and things like that. The second most common matchup was between Graves and Gwen. So Graves, obviously a very popular champion. You'll see him again on here. You see Gwen a lot on here because Gwen was picked often. Graves was another answer. 64% of the time, the team with the Graves won. Obviously, Graves provides a totally different field to the top lane than the Gragas. Graves is there to win lane against a Gwen. Graves comes out on top slightly more than 50. They comes out on top 51% of the time at a plat level. There are a lot of good Graves in the world. Not as many good Gwens, and I'll get to why. In most of Gwen's matchups, she actually has a losing win rate. In 9 matchups, Jax and Gwen, I think Jax has the edge, slightly. Obviously, there's not enough matchups to really say anything about. However, the Jace-Gwen matchup's the interesting one. I believe Jace won every time, like 9-0. So that's something, notable. A lot of people might say, oh, well, it's only 9 games, and maybe you missed one. And I'm not going to lie, I could have missed one. But as of my stats, the way I looked at it, and I've been watching all the games, so maybe I misentered something or whatever, but as of right now, I have Jace 9-0 over Gwen for patch 12.1, so we'll see how that goes going forward, as neither champion was affected in 12.2. We'll look back at every patch and kind of do this, and I'll keep the stats for the end of the year to be like, okay, or Spring Split. These are the most common champs used in Spring Split. This was the whole deal throughout the whole couple months. 8 times Camille played Gwen. That was kind of a mixed bag, I think. That might have been 50-50 between the two champions. Very similar champions, so I'm not surprised. It's a very skill-based matchup. Jace Graves. When people picked the Jace or the Graves, they felt that we should pick a arranged champion to fend against that one, and Jace is the most common answer to Graves and vice versa. Finally, 8 times the Gragas-Gnar matchup, so someone picks Gragas, we need a tank to match it. Gnar was the most common tank response. Like I said, this is top, and now on to jungle. All right, now on to the jungle. So we have clearly 5 matchups here. I mean, sorry that the print gets small over here. I will tell you what the percentage is because, I mean, it's going to be hard to read it. So the jungle meta was pretty set and dry, clear, cut and dry. It was Lee Sin, Jarvan, Viego. And that's what ended up being here. A mix of any possible combination that could be between those 3 champions is listed here, except Viego Lee Sin. Viego Lee Sin wasn't a thing. However, everything else was. Well, it was a thing, but didn't come up more than 10 times. Very different, obviously, than top. Top, every top laner may have their own specific answer to a champion, or combination of the two. One tricks and things like that. Where the jungle is, like I said, more cut and dry. So, most commonly, we saw Lee Sin, Xin Zhao. Lee Sin came out on top 53% of the time in pro play. However, in solo queue, in both the plat and challenger level, Xin Zhao was a better player, better champion. And I feel like that has a lot to do with, like, Lee Sin's a very technical champion. You need to be very, very particular in how you play him and play him very well. And I think that's why he struggles in a solo queue setting, where Xin Zhao can be a tank, he can be a carry for some people, depending on how they build him. And there were a lot of matchups of the 2 champions in solo queue. I think like 20,000 or so. So there's a big pool of stats to look at to determine this. 24 times we saw Viego and Xin Zhao, as well as Jarvan and Xin Zhao. So Xin Zhao oftentimes was picked very often, as well as Jarvan, as you see here. Xin Zhao came out over Viego often ahead. Viego struggled in overall in this patch. Despite him being picked towards the end, he wasn't being picked as much. Because he struggled. He was either snowball or failed. He failed hard. And towards the end, we even saw some Poppy, Diana, things like that coming into the meta, and Viego was getting pushed out. So Xin Zhao won 63% of the time, which is pretty healthy. Very significant in pro play. Xin Zhao barely won at a solo queue level, 51%, 55%. That makes sense. With a snowball champion, if you get somebody decent on the Viego in jungle, they'll probably carry a pro game, solo queue game, whereas Xin Zhao isn't as likely to carry one. 24 times we saw J4 versus Xin Zhao. This is a tank matchup. More so, Xin Zhao is going to build more tank than carry, because you're not trying to match that. You're trying to match the all-in potential of J4. It was a draw. J4 kind of mitigated the Xin Zhao impact in games. 51%, 54%. So in solo queue, it's very similar. It's kind of a coin flip between the 2 champions based on who's better, depending on what your composition is. J4 is a Wombo combo champion, so and Xin Zhao is as well. So they have similar impacts on the game, and the team that drafts them have similar thoughts on how they want the game to be played. 16 times Lee Sin versus J4, draw 8-8. J4 stronger in solo queue, same reason as before. Lee Sin players are not as good in solo queue. It's just as simple as that. It's a very technical champion. You need to be very, very adept at playing him, and I'm not surprised J4 beats it in solo queue. However, in pro play, I am surprised J4 is able to keep up with Lee Sin, given that Lee Sin can, do a little bit more than J4 and impact the game in more. I mean, it's more technical, so I guess it's hard to explain. Like, J4 is more lock on target with his ultimate. However, Lee Sin can kick people out of the pits and also take on carries and kick them into the team fight and flank and things like that. So they have similar ways you want to go about using them. However, J4 is more reliable. 13 times Viego J4. J4 beat Viego. Same thing as before. Viego was very coin flip. I mean, not coin flip, but not very good in patch 12.1. J4 carried more in Challenger than Viego did, winning 63% of the time. J4's win rates in solo queue are really good, actually, in these matchups. 54, 64, 63. So J4 is looking really good in solo queue. Like I said, lock on target, able to take out the carries versus more technical champions such as Lee and Viego. It's harder to do, especially in Lee Sin. However, Viego does not. People can't carry on Viego against J4 like they can against Xin Zhao. Pretty much what I get out of this. However, obviously there's a lot more information here than top lane, and mid lane is more like top lane, so let's get to that. Like I said, similar to top lane, mid lane here we don't have as much in terms of, common matchups occurring. I mean, we have 2 that happen more than 10 times. Clearly here you see Victor listed 4 times. Victor was the key champion in this patch. He continues in 12.2 to be a key person that teams pick in mid lane to kind of be like, okay, let's scale. Very common matchup against Corki. 31 times it occurred. Corki won at 61% of the time. However, in solo queue, it's closer, 52% for Victor in Plat Plus. Challenger, 56% for Corki. That makes sense. Obviously, Corki's win rate has a lot to do with his package timing. And at a Plat level, teams can't get as coordinated as much in solo queue to use the package properly. So Victor winning more makes sense. However, in pro play, obviously, teams want to use the package at the right time around Drakes, around objectives, big moments, and that makes a difference. Challenger makes sense for that to happen because team players are better. When it came to Vex, however, it was 5-5 because the Vex could kind of just go in on Corki, and Corki couldn't kill her because she can be built tanky. She can be built more AP, a mix of both. Obviously, in solo queue, Vex had a stronger win rate. I think it's twofold. Same thing as before in Plat. Players don't necessarily know how to use Corki's package properly or coordinate with their teammates. Whereas it also has something to do with Vex being a newer champion. People are still probably getting used to her. Playing against her is probably difficult. Now, when it comes to lesser known matchups, we had Orianna Victor, which was heavily Orianna favored, I think 7-2. Obviously, I didn't write anything here because it didn't happen 10 times. But Orianna was a counter to Victor, as well as Corki. Akali Victor, we saw a lot of Akalis, which is a very different matchup, obviously. Nothing like Orianna or Corki. Akali's an assassin. If you allow the Akali to go off, she goes off. Ryze Victor. Ryze is very similar to Orianna in that way. Mage mid. Oh, you banned Orianna. You banned Syndra. I'm going Ryze. It's commonplace for Ryze to be the next pick. Like I said, there wasn't really as much in terms of... it's not like Jungle here, obviously. Jungle was very clear cut. We had those 3 champions being used often. Whereas here, it's more like top lane where everyone was trying to figure out how to answer Gwen. Here, everyone's trying to figure out how to answer Victor. Obviously, like I said, if people first picked Corki and the Victor was banned, people chose to pick Vex most often. So that's kind of that for mid lane. And AD carry is next, which will be a lot more like jungle. Alright, so with the bot lane, we have more matchups here. Similar to how the jungle matchups were. We have a lot of things happening often. Not a lot of pizzazz in the bot lane. Jinx Aphelios, obviously the key matchup. 65 times, happened often. See Jinx here, Aphelios. This one, being Caitlyn Jhin, was interesting when both were banned. It seemed that Caitlyn and Jhin were the most common picks otherwise. And then Ziggs early on in the patch and the split was a common pick against Aphelios. So let's get started. Jinx and Phalios, like I said, they were picked in the first rotation if neither were banned. Jinx came out on top 57% of the time. And then it was a mixed bag in solo queue. Jinx 55%. When you get to a higher level, Aphelios took control of the win rate. That would make sense. Aphelios is a complicated champion. The better player you are, the better success you will have with Aphelios. However, in pro play, it's very snowbally. Teams, once they get leads, don't blow it. And Jinx is more likely to snowball than Aphelios, especially in an individual team fight. Once a player gets a kill, the resets, they end up carrying the fight and carrying the game. When Aphelios was banned and first team picked Jinx, Jhin was the most common response. Jhin obviously being a very laid back carry. As we all know, his ultimate, stand way in the back and just fire rockets at people. Jinx did beat Jhin more often than not, 61% of the time, leading me to believe that Jhin probably wasn't the best counter to Jinx. I think Ezreal was picked 9 times, and they also struggled. Jinx was a really hard champion to beat in this patch. Jinx had the win rate slightly above Jhin in solo queue as well. I feel like teams, similar to how I went over in mid lane with the Corki package, teams cannot coordinate as well around the Jhin ultimate as a Jinx would. I mean, Jinx just fires the rocket, so it makes sense. When Jinx was banned and Aphelios was picked, Jhin was a common counter as well. Aphelios definitely beat the crap out of Jhin as well. So Jhin, once again, not being a good counter. However, in solo queue, very similar to how I explained the Jinx situation. At a plat level, I'm not surprised that a Jhin would be better than Aphelios, despite what I said here about being harder to work around Jin's ultimate. In the end, Aphelios is a more complicated champion to pilot, so Jhin having a higher win rate makes sense. Obviously, this is all within a vacuum, however, and the bot lane is oftentimes affected by the supports. Aphelios, slightly higher win rate in Challenger, similar reason. When both were banned, Caitlyn was a high priority pick. Caitlyn would get banned against some players, and some players don't play her, so they didn't ban her at all. However, Caitlyn, very strong pick for those who played her, 64%. Caitlyn was very, very good. In a solo queue sense, people struggled piloting her. I really think Caitlyn is a power pick. She should be picked more often. I think she should be being picked against Aphelios and Jinx. I mean, can't do much worse than the rate the Jhin was playing. So for people to, be like, well, Caitlyn kind of, struggles against those champions. Well, based on win rates, you can't do much worse. But yeah, early on in the patch, in the season, Ziggs was a common Aphelios counter. However, Ziggs went 50-50, 5-5. Ziggs wins in solo queue as well. Makes sense. Very easy champion to carry games with, being AP. An AP answer to Aphelios, a little more complicated, a little more finessed by that team that drafts them. They have to draft a AD mid, or definitely an AD jungle as well, to try and make up for the fact that they have all that AP in the bot lane matchup. However, people should have kept picking it because obviously it has a higher win rate than the Jhin, but it's harder to pilot when it comes to some players in bot lane just don't play Ziggs. They just outright don't. I mean, we saw Elk play Ziggs and look like crap, and I think they won the game, but he looked awful. Some players can't play it. However, they should be playing it because he's not getting nerfed, and he is still a quality bot laner. Okay, so on to support. Support is going to be more like top and mid, I believe. There aren't as many champion matchups. A lot more. I mean, there's a lot. I think there was maybe the most champion combinations was in support this patch. Nevertheless, on to that. Alright, so maybe I misremembered my numbers here. Support had common matchups, more like jungle and AD carry than top and mid. We saw common matchups around Nautilus, Leona, and Thresh, all being at least included in here in some way, shape, or form. Most common being Nautilus Leona because the Thresh was getting banned often in first rotations. Nautilus Leona, 2 tank champions. Not surprised that they're both draw. They both kind of do the same thing. Leona goes in with the Solar Flare and her abilities, whereas Nautilus, similar hook or his guaranteed ultimate allows for easy to work around for team fights and objectives. Leona 53%, 63%. I am a little surprised. The Nautilus hook isn't that hard to hit. However, I guess teams struggle more in solo queue trying to work around the hook and work around the ultimate compared to Leona that solar flares and gets kills. It's hard to explain that, and I feel like I've been able to explain a lot of things so far and talk out of my butt, but in this case I really can't. 14, the most common hook matchup, Nautilus Thresh. We see that often. Thresh provides more than Nautilus with his W. That's why he has a 79% pro win rate. People work around that. They work around the hook. They work around his box and things like that. He is the most commonly picked support. Thresh, slight win rate. More people use Thresh than Nautilus. I'm not surprised. Like I said, with his W, provides a lot of help for players that might not be as good in Plat as Pro play. I'm not surprised about that at all. When Nautilus was banned, Rakan was a common counter to Leona. Obviously, when Leona goes in on a champion, Rakan can then go in on that fight as well and help their AD carry. Leona, 56% win rate in pro play. Rakan loses a little bit without Xayah. Not surprised there. Leona works for everybody. Draw in solo queue. Probably a lot of Xayah Rakans being able to offset the Leona. Leona at a high level in Challenger once again, 60% win rate. Leona is a highly contested pick in Challenger. Players know how to work around it. Thresh Leona. Obviously, Nautilus banned. People went with Leona against Thresh. Thresh, slight win rate, not as much as Nautilus, but nevertheless, still a high win rate. Leona has a slight advantage in solo queue. That's kind of, I guess, the answer to Thresh was more so Leona and Lulu than it would have been going with the Nautilus. In hindsight, Nautilus really struggled. A lot of people said, oh, enchanters. And in 12.2, enchanters are more common with the Janna and Nami being included in this whole mess. This board, I think, specifically support will look a lot different in the 12.2 video. Nevertheless, people pick Lulu. Draw Lulu in solo queue at a plat level. It makes sense that Lulu was stronger in solo queue. It's easier to use an enchanter and a ranged support than it is a hook champion support. That takes a little more thought and work around than a Lulu. A Lulu could hypothetically carry a game because it's an AP champ. Thresh, higher win rate at the highest levels because obviously at the highest levels, Thresh has value, similar to Leona. So yeah, we saw a lot of Nautilus, Leona, and Thresh here. I think, like I said, it'll be different for 12.2 with the Jannas and the Namis, and once people really get working on that with the LCK. LCK is going already for 12.2, and the LCS just ended Sunday. That's why this is being done now. If you're a fan of the LEC or LCK, you probably are wondering, why is he doing this now? That's why, because the LCS still were playing games, so there's still information to throw into here. 12.2, I don't think we'll have as many matchups reached as high of numbers, so I'll have 5 listed here. I think it'll look more like top and mid because the LPL is not playing in 12.2, and without them playing in 12.2, there's a lot of less games being played, obviously, a lot less 3-game series, and we'll see how long 12.2 gets played. I imagine it'll be through this week and the next week, and then maybe the LPL will skip 12.2 outright and go to 12.3 next week when they return, as well as the LCK. We'll see. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you liked it. It's something different that, like I said in the first part of this video, I did this last year and people seem to enjoy it in a written form, hopefully in a video form, it still holds true. If you enjoy this content, comment below that you enjoyed it, so I know that it's worth doing. I'm going to continue doing it anyways, nevertheless, because I like it, but hopefully other people enjoy it as well. And lastly, again, thank you for watching.